Particle systems in 3ds Max come in two basic flavors. One referred to as a non-event-driven particle system, while the other is known as an event-driven system. The major difference between the two is basically how they work and how much time and complexity there is in setup. With a non-event-driven particle system, the particles you create operate continuously, meaning they don't change in some way over the course of the animation due to some specific event taking place, hence the name non-event-driven. Examples might be water spraying from a fountain or maybe smoke coming from a campfire. Neither of those effects requires something else, some kind of trigger in other words, in order to operate. They simply work exclusive of anything in your scene happening. That's a non-event driven system. Now the story is a little different with an event-driven system. You see, event-driven particles can change from one look or state to another over the course of the animation, all depending on what parameters or instructions you plug or program in. And that makes an event-driven system, which is defined by what are called events, much more flexible as to the effects that it can create. These events that I mentioned are kind of wired into the particle system and are designed to affect the behavior of the particles over time in some particular manner, like maybe changing their appearance or specifically what they do. Let me give you an example of just how an event-driven system might work. Let's say that we've got a rocket taking off from a launch pad on its way into space. To create the thrust, the fire and smoke that'll propel the rocket upward, we'll create an event-driven particle system that will position at the back of the rocket. Once the rocket is blasted off, having made its way through the clouds and further into the atmosphere, we're going to want to change the look of what's coming out of the back end, maybe to something more like a simple flame without the fire and smoke. Now, an event-driven system would enable us to be able to do just that, allowing us to program or change the look of the particles after a certain amount of time after liftoff. We'll tell the particles to go from one look to another after X number of seconds or minutes, in other words. Having a drop of water hitting a hot plate and turning into a puff of steam would be another example of an event-driven system. The event would be changing the look of the particle once it made contact with the hot plate. Think about that. Once contact was made, the water drop would magically change its appearance to taking on the look of a puff of steam. It's pretty cool the way these event-driven systems work. Non-event systems don't change over time and don't need a particular event to happen or take place in order to work. Event-driven systems, on the other hand, do and can change over time, all depending on how the events in the effect have been programmed to trip or trigger other events. Now, as you work through the title, you're going to find that most of Max's particle effects are non-event driven, but one in particular called Particle Flow gives you that special event-driven setup, which we're going to be looking at in detail. Okay, next up, we're going to take a look at a handful of specific controls and parameters that are fairly typical on most particle effects. Settings that you'll be adjusting irrespective of the system that you decide to use. We're going to get to all that in the next video. Let's go take a look.